For this lesson, we'll start you off with a demonstration. I'm on the jobs website, Indeed, and I'm looking for jobs in the entire United States that has the exact phrase month-end close in the job responsibilities. Let's take a look. And oh my gosh, there's over 6,000 jobs available in the United States where part of your responsibility would be doing some type of month-end close procedures. Let's take a look at some of these job titles. Senior accountant, support month-end close activities. Oh my gosh, including journal entries, accrual entries. That's some good stuff from chapters 2 and 3 right there. General ledger manager, accounts receivable billing specialist, accounting coordinator, and so on and so on. The reason why I bring this up, actually I was going to show you something else right here. This was a LinkedIn message I received from a former student of mine just a couple months ago, and I invited him to an accounting event at my former university, and he couldn't make it. Why could Matt not make the event? He said, oh darn, March 11th is day 7 of month-end close, which is when we wrap up and meet with the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, to discuss our consolidated reporting, and then I spend the afternoon distributing the financial statements, assuming everything is approved during the meeting. So that's my lead-in to our topic here, the closing process, and how this is a big deal in real-life accounting for businesses, particularly at the end of the month and end of the year. So this is where we left off in our accounting cycle. We're getting close, but in this lesson, we're going to focus on what we call closing entries and eventually a post-closing trial balance. So let's give you this analogy. I know not all of you are sports and football fans, but my hometown, Green Bay, in the year 2023, the Green Bay Packers had a regular season record of 9 wins and 8 losses. Fast forward to the next year, the year 2024, their very first game was in Brazil against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they lost that game. When they lost that game, here's what we don't do. We don't do this. Their record was 9-8 the previous year. We don't say that they're now 9-9. We don't carry over wins and losses from the previous year. Nope, we don't do that. We start over. We reset their wins and losses record, and they're listed as 0-1 after that first game. Or, watch this. This was the Green Bay Packers' regular season record of all time before the 2023 season. Wins, losses, and ties. Once the 2023 season is done, we can update their regular season all-time win-loss record, and that reflects their new wins, losses, and ties after the season. We've now updated their all-time record going back to many, many years prior. That analogy is what we're going to do with the closing process. What you're going to see coming up is we're going to do 2 things. We are going to close temporary accounts to 0, like we wiped out their regular season record from last year to start over this year. And we're going to update the retained earnings account, just like we updated their regular season all-time record for their wins and losses in 2023. We first have to give you a description of the difference between temporary accounts and permanent accounts. Temporary accounts are those that we keep track of for a period of time, but then we wipe them out. We reset them to 0 at the end of the period. What you're going to see in these closing entries is that we wipe out accounts like revenues. Gains we get to later on in this course. Expenses we wipe out to 0. This brand new account called income summary, we're going to wipe that out to 0. You'll see that coming up in a moment. And dividends, we reset to 0. We close them out to start the next period with a clean slate. Then we have permanent accounts. These we never, ever, 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 ever close out to 0, but the balance at the end of one period carries over to the beginning of the next period. These are your permanent accounts: assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity. Wait a second, those look familiar. Oh yeah, that's right, those are our balance sheet accounts. Any accounts that appear on the balance sheet, we don't wipe them out to 0 at the end of the period. So let's walk you through the 4 closing entries that we typically do through this closing process. The first one, the whole purpose of it is to close our revenues. So I like to use pictures as an example. We're going to take any balances in the revenue cups, excuse me, and dump it into income summary, this new account you haven't seen before. Remember, revenues has a normal credit balance. So if I had $100 over here, to get it down to zero, I would have to debit revenues for $100. And if we debit revenues in our closing entries, the offset would be we are closing them to income summary on the credit side. So our first closing entry for Fast Forward would look like this. Revenues, two of them, consulting and rental revenue, are decreased and closed out with debits. And when we add them together, income summary is credited for $8,150. Now this income summary account, you're not going to see this terminology in your textbook, but I like to call it a garbage pail account. We're going to dump some numbers in the garbage into income summary for a little bit, and then as you'll see in our third closing entry, we're going to take out the trash, wipe income summary out to zero. Income summary is a temporary account because we will close out to zero coming up in a moment. And income summary is unique. It doesn't have a normal balance side because it's all going to depend on if a company has a net income or net loss for a period of time. Our second closing entry, we're going to wipe out any expenses and dump those numbers into our garbage pail account, income summary. Remember, expenses have a normal debit balance, so we have to credit expenses to get them to zero. And if we credit the expenses, then we have to debit income summary for the total. Now, what I'm about to show you right here is going to be a big whopping journal entry for Fast Forward, so don't get freaked out by the number of lines. But when we close out expenses, Fast Forward has 6 expenses for the month of December. So we close them out to zero with credits, and then the grand total is our debit to income summary. Remember, debits always go first. So income summary is first, our credits are listed second. But we take our expenses and dump them into income summary in our second closing entry. Which brings us to our third closing entry. Income summary has some numbers swirling in the account right now. We're going to take whatever balance is in income summary and transfer it over to retained earnings. Now, this credit over here is all of our revenues. This debit over here on income summary is all of our expenses. Wait a second. Revenues minus expenses. That must be our net income for the month of December. And remember, net income makes retained earnings go up. Watch the hand gestures one more time. Net income makes retained earnings go up. So what we'll do is we are going to credit retained earnings because retained earnings goes up on the credit side. And here's your third closing entry. We wipe out the income summary balance to zero because a $3,785 credit minus a $3,785 debit gets us down to zero. And we update our retained earnings for net income. That's our third closing entry. We've now wiped out income summary and updated retained earnings for the net income. So our fourth and last closing entry is we wipe out dividends. We're going to take any balance in dividends and transfer it over to retained earnings. Now, dividends has a normal debit balance, so we have to credit dividends in this closing entry to get it to zero. And remember, dividends decreases retained earnings. Hand gestures. Dividends decreases retained earnings, so therefore we have to debit retained earnings in this closing entry. Looks like Fast Forward had $200 of dividends in the month of December, so we decrease retained earnings with a debit. We wipe out the dividends account with a credit, and that is our fourth and final closing entry. So we did it. We accomplished both of our purposes. Number one, we wiped out all of our temporary accounts, revenues, expenses, income summary, and dividends. And we updated retained earnings. We increased it for net income, decreased it for the $200 of dividends. So what you're seeing in front right here is the ninth and final step of the accounting cycle. We do something called a post-closing trial balance. Now, post means after. So really, we're not trying to be tricky here. This is a trial balance after we do our closing entries. Notice a couple things here. Only our permanent accounts remain. Nowhere on this post-closing trial balance do you see revenues, expenses, dividends, income summary. It's only our permanent accounts. Let's just do a final check to make sure our total debits equals total credits. And they do, $43,045. Great. And also notice that we only have our balance sheet accounts that remain. Assets, liabilities, and our equity accounts. And congratulations, Fast Forward is all set to start the next accounting period once we have a post-closing trial balance. And that's our accounting cycle, going all the way from source documents and analyzing transactions all the way to the end of a post-closing trial balance. Now you might be wondering, in our accounting textbook, we can go through this fairly quickly. Why does it take Matt Adams and his big company 7 days to do a month-end close process? Well, in real life, it takes that long, especially for these adjusting entries. These adjusting entries take quite a bit of time to record revenues and expenses in the right time period. So in real life, it could take several days to close your books for his company or for many others. And that's it. Congratulations. We're done with the accounting cycle, all 9 steps. Hopefully we walked you through the purpose of the closing process in this lesson and give you a couple real-life examples of jobs where you would do something with month-end close for a company.